What's up, and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars. For today, we're doing another ranking video, and this time we're covering all the films in the Spider-Man universe of films from worst to best, and that actually includes Venom. In general, I'm a Spider-Man fan, through and through, so some of my rankings and some of my opinions on the universe may massively differ from your own, and that's okay. There will be a couple of ties on this list too, so the most important number is the overall score, but the tiebreaker comes down to the bias score, because at the end of the day, two films scored exactly the same means that they're both equally as good in my opinion, but I might prefer one over the other, and that's where the bias comes into play. It'll make more sense as we go along, so let's get cracking. In ninth place, also known as last place, is Spider-Man 3 with a score of 69%. This is the only film in the entire marathon to have scored a D score. In general, it's just a sloppy movie that Sam Raimi unfortunately was kind of forced to make with the inclusion of Venom storyline, which he didn't want to do. Honestly, a majority of what's bad in this movie has to do with the Venom symbiote. Eddie Brock, played by Topher Grace, a disgrace. Keeping Venom for the last 5 minutes was a terrible idea. If you're gonna use him, use him. If you're not, don't. Venom also looks stupid. The Venom symbiote affects Peter to the point of making him dance in the street without music. There's a lot of silly stuff going on here, and then you have the busy storyline of too many villains. So many that they had to sideline their stories until later. The only redeeming thing about this movie was Sandman, and I loved everything about Sandman. Everything. It's just unfortunate that he was in this movie. In 8th place, with a score jumping up to 84%, is Venom. Even though Venom is this low on the list, you know it as well as I do that 84% is not a bad score at all. That's a B. I honestly really enjoy this movie, and I wouldn't mind adding it to my collection because, in my opinion, whatever problem that they had with Venom in Spider-Man 3, they fixed with Venom. He had the look of Venom, he had the sound of Venom. Tom Hardy in the role was a perfect choice for Eddie Brock. The tone of the movie was perfect, and giving independence to the character so that he didn't have to depend on Spider-Man to exist was, in my opinion, a great move. It makes the character better. Dependence on another character to exist means that the character isn't that great on his own, but if a movie can give him independence, then you're making him a great character. In theory. In general, I did really enjoy this movie. It has some issues with maybe some visuals here and there, but I don't have a lot to complain about. In 7th place, scored just 1% higher at 85%, is The Amazing Spider-Man. The first Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield isn't a terrible film by any means. I actually like it pretty well, so just 1% higher than Venom should tell you how much I like Venom. The reason why The Amazing Spider-Man is this low on the list, however, is probably because I don't like the suit in the movie. I don't like the wet, skin-tight leather look of the suit, nor the eye pieces, and his Peter Parker I've never been a fond of, and I think I dislike his Parker in this movie much more than the sequel. Take that as you will. In 6th place, scored 86%, is Spider-Man Homecoming. Here we go. Spider-Man Homecoming is more or less middle of the road here because in the scheme of things, you have to understand MCU rules to understand this movie. And when you have all these other movies on the list that are standalone and work without needing knowledge in the MCU, it feels a little bit weird, kind of confusing, but it does excel in being different and being the best of both worlds when it comes down to the presentation of both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. If the presentation of the Vulture was done a little bit better, or if the Spider-Man suit didn't just look like a CGI rendered suit, I feel like this would have been scored a lot higher. In 5th place, also scored 86%, is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It is now time for the first tie between Homecoming and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This one actually surprised me to find that the second Amazing Spider-Man film was higher on this list than Homecoming. The bias score of Homecoming was 84%, while this was 90%. It's a very, very busy film with a lot of villains and an annoying setup for the Sinister Six, but it's also, in my opinion, the best looking and best sounding Spider-Man film of the bunch. Amazing techno score, amazing Spider-Man suit, amazing cinematography, probably the best shots of Spider-Man swinging around the city, the best 3D in the series, and I love Electro's story and character. I loved a lot of what this film had to offer. I also thought Peter Parker's performance was slightly better than the first film. Busy story, yes, but there's stuff in this movie that I think is the best to be found in Spider-Man. In 4th place, scored 88%, is Spider-Man Far From Home. On rewatch, Far From Home scored a little bit lower than the first time that I saw it. I was focused on all these movies as just Spider-Man movies. If anybody does the same, the Tom Holland films are just confusing because you need to watch them in conjunction with MCU's entirety. But if you don't care about the MCU and you just want to watch a Spider-Man film to watch a Spider-Man film, then there's no way to avoid it. This series is confusing. But Far From Home specifically stands out as great because it's the only Spider-Man film to take place primarily outside of New York, and because it had Mysterio in it, in which I've wanted to see ever since Tobey's time as Spider-Man. It's also one of the only Spider-Man movies hard to talk about because it's easily spoiled, and I also really love the chemistry between MJ and Peter. So this one is still a very good addition for what it is. In third place at 92% is Spider-Man. For me, the first Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire is iconic. Tobey as Peter, Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin, Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane, James Franco as Harry Osborn. When I think of these characters, it's often hard for me not to think of these faces first. Maybe that's because of nostalgia. Maybe it's because there's something that I find magical about the series as a whole. I'm not sure, but for me, this is the best presentation of Peter Parker. It's the best variation of the origin story. It's the best Aunt May. It's also one of Willem Dafoe's best and most iconic work. To me, there's an element of this film that I consider flawless, but there are still others that are better. In second place at 95% is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So a lot of people think that this is the best Spider-Man film, and for good reason. This, like Far From Home, stands out as a different Spider-Man film. In its visuals, in its concept with the Spider-Verse, in its bold choice to change perspective from Peter Parker to Miles Morales. In all of it, introducing the Spider-Verse introduced a multiverse of possibilities that Sony could take this world, and are clearly planning to. I love this movie. If there was only one thing that I could complain about, is that not every Spider-Man character that shows up is there with an independent function. Some are there just to be interesting and funny and to change things up, but they themselves aren't contributing that much to the overall story of stopping Kingpin and closing the multiverse. In first place, also scored 95%, is Spider-Man 2. So we are at our second and final tie between Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man 2. Both films people consider to be the best of Spider-Man, and coincidentally, both are scored 95%. It gets even crazier because both films are tied in the biased and unbiased scores too. The only place where Spider-Man 2 comes out on top was in the people category for the reason that I just talked about, where everybody didn't seem to be important in Into the Spider-Verse. They did seem to be important in Spider-Man 2, which means that the people score was just a little bit scored higher at the end of the day. So it's a fourth tiebreaker. But again, it was incredibly close. Incredibly close. Even the plot of both films was remarkably similar, but for now, Spider-Man 2 is still undefeated. And that's it. That's my ranking as it stands now for the Spider-Man universe of films. I'm sure my ranking differs from yours though, so let me know what it is in the comments down below. I'd love to see how others see this series, so leave the rankings down below. As for YouTube, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button if you like this review and would like to see some others like it. Hit the thumbs up button because that always helps out my channel. And don't forget about the little bell icon because that'll help notify you when I come up with my next review. Until then, peace out!